found him sleeping in a blanket in the bushes.
Good evening, this is Emmanuel Rizzo Martinez from Homeless in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Today I want to talk about criminalization of homelessness. Measures that criminalize homelessness are legally problematic and do not make sense from a policy standpoint. Laws that make it difficult for homeless persons to stay in downtown areas of cities throughout the nation force homeless individuals away from crucial services and outreach. When a homeless person is arrested under one of these laws, he or she develops a criminal record, making it more difficult to obtain employment or housing. Further criminalizing homelessness is an inefficient allocation of resources. It costs more money to incarcerate someone than it does to provide supportive housing. Homeless persons and their advocates throughout the country have worked to prevent the passage of laws to halt policies and practices that criminalize homelessness. Unfortunately, some cities and police departments sometimes do not respond to such advocacy in a productive way. When local governments fail to respond to policy advocacy, homeless persons and their advocates have turned to litigation to end these laws and practices. As successful litigation has shown, many of the practices and policies that punish the public performance of life-sustaining activities by homeless persons violate the constitutional rights of homeless persons. Now let's look at anti-panhandling laws after the following video.
Panhandlers in cities across Northeast Ohio, they are becoming more aggressive and bold. But is it right to punish those who are simply asking for help? The American Civil Liberties Union says no. And now it's fighting to change the ordinances some cities have in place. News 5's Mike Brookbank has new developments.
Here's the letter sent to more than 36 cities asking mayors and city council members to scrap current ordinances that target those down on their luck, getting punished for making a plea.
We know that at least some cities are still enforcing anti-panhandling laws.
With recent cases of homeless people being harassed, arrested, or cited for simply asking for help,
there's a right to free speech, not a right to be free from speech.
Attorney Joseph Mead tells me it's time for communities to re-examine their laws.
Simply somebody asking for a donation is not a problem that cities need to be worrying about.
Mead says these ordinances are often used to keep homeless people out of popular areas.
The public spaces belong to all of us, including people experiencing homelessness.
The ACLU says some of the cities targeted are still enforcing anti-panhandling laws, despite the consistent trend of the courts striking them down.
It's time to update your laws to be constitutionally compliant, and there may be consequences if you don't.
This latest push comes on the heels of the ACLU taking legal action against ordinances in Cleveland and Akron.
Both cities repealed it as a result. So litigation is a possibility against any of these cities.
At the end of the day, Mead tells me these laws do nothing to solve the issue of homelessness.
In fact, it can make it worse by imposing fines and fees and arrest record, criminal history, which all of those things make it harder to climb out of homelessness.
The mayor of Eastlake says the begging ordinance in his city has been on the books there since 1967. It is not currently enforced, and he does not see any reason to bring this issue to the city council. However, in Oberlin, the law director there says they're going to take a look at their ordinance, and they take the request from the ACLU very seriously. Reporting in Cleveland tonight, Mike Brookbank, News 5.
Anti-panhandling ordinances. One way that cities throughout the nation have targeted poor and homeless individuals is by passing laws that prohibit panhandling, solicitation, or begging. Depending on the scope of these ordinances, these type of laws can infringe on the right to free speech under the First Amendment. Courts have found begging to be protected speech. Laws that restrict speech too much target speech based on its content and does not allow for alternative channels of communication violate the First Amendment. Some courts have found that laws that prohibit begging or panhandling unconstitutionally vague. A law is unconstitutionally vague if its language is not definite enough to give people notice of what's being prohibited, or if police can enforce the law in an arbitrary manner. Now let's look at anti-camping or anti-sleeping measures after the following video.
But first, what could be the toughest homeless camping crackdown ever in Sacramento County? Thanks so much for joining us at 10 o'clock. I'm Elizabeth Kling.
And I'm Tony Lopez. We're also streaming live on CBS News Sacramento. The proposal from a group of business leaders, including the Sacramento Chamber of Commerce, wants to ban camping near infrastructure like bridges, the American River Parkway, and government buildings. It's set to go before the board in just a few days. But is it legal? CBS 13's Laura Hafley is live with pushback from homeless advocates tonight. Laura.
Well, we've covered several stories about the unhoused population in the last week, and tonight advocates are demanding answers and help from Sacramento County after news of this ordinance that says the unhoused population may have to move. Sacramento County could make it illegal for the unhoused to live outside.
There's no place to go.
An ordinance will be considered in the coming days that would prohibit camping like this in Sacramento County, near critical infrastructure, government buildings, and the American River Parkway.
There's been lots of cries from some parts of the community to move homeless people off the American River Parkway. And the question is to where? We're really concerned that the county will sort of go down that path and sort of define sort of everything that the county has as critical infrastructure, which means that homeless people can hardly be anywhere.
Bob Erlenbush is the executive director of the Sacramento Regional Coalition to End Homelessness.
There's about 10,000 or 11,000 people experiencing homelessness on an annual basis.
And Erlenbush tells us Sacramento area's shelters are full.
And the county and city, quite frankly, should focus their efforts on creating more emergency shelters, more tiny home villages, and obviously affordable housing.
We met Michael Lopez earlier this week, who told our crew he'd been homeless for nearly 2 decades, and for much of that time forced to live outdoors.
I'd definitely be inside of the shelter if they were available.
The measure would require the county to create enough new shelters to house a percentage of the unsheltered population, as well as provide resources.
Creating those shelters, creating that affordable housing takes a long time. So in the meantime, if these ordinances pass, where will the unhoused population go?
They'll continue to be moved around by the city and the county to wherever they can find a place to be.
A 2019 federal appeals court decision keeps the homeless from being moved unless a shelter bed is available. The advocate we spoke to tonight says he will use that argument moving forward. We did reach out to the Sacramento County Board of Supervisors. They were not available to talk.
As many cities do not have adequate shelter space for homeless individuals, are often left with no alternative but to sleep and live in public spaces, such as sidewalks and parks. This is something that is currently happening in Harrisonburg, Virginia, because of the closing of Open Doors Emergency Shelter and the city failing to help us find another place for the shelter to go. Even while cities are not dedicating enough resources to give homeless persons access to housing or shelters, some cities have enacted laws that impose criminal penalties upon people for sleeping outside. For example, in Atlanta, the law prohibits what is called urban camping. These punishments for sleeping outside have been challenged in courts for violating homeless individuals' civil rights. Some courts have found that arresting homeless people for sleeping outside when no shelter space exists violates their 8th Amendment right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. Advocates have also contended that arresting people for sleeping outside violates the fundamental right to travel. If people are arrested for sleeping in public in a city or certain areas of a city, those arrests have the effect of preventing homeless people from moving within a city or coming to a city, thereby interfering with their right to travel. And now, let's look at loitering measures after the following video.
All new here at 10 o'clock, a new ordinance in Greenville County will prohibit trespassing and loitering at the detention center. It was brought to the table after complaints about several people staying in the lobby for hours. Now, it was voted on by the county council tonight.
Fox Carolina's Kennedy Harris was there. And Kennedy, you mentioned to us some people felt there was a better way to address the problem. What does that look like?
Yeah, the assumption is that many of the people hanging out in the lobby are homeless or just people with nowhere to go. It's a public building, and before this ordinance, there was no law against them being there, so they're allowed to stay. But a local activist says the issue falls hand in hand with the homelessness crisis in the city.
All in favor, say aye.
It might be a jail, but for some, it's a safe haven.
So it's one thing to put restrictions on them. I get it, I understand it, but let's also find a way to make sure that we can help them.
After complaints from the detention center about several people hanging out in the lobby for long periods of time, Councilman Lynn Ballard says something needs to be done.
It's causing problems in the lobby with too many people in there, for one thing. Secondly, I guess there's been some problems in the restrooms and whatever with the cleanliness.
The ordinance will allow the facility to place time limits on how long a person can be inside. Violators could face a $500 fine, but leaders believe most of the people just don't have anywhere else to go.
This time of year it's cool, in the wintertime it's warm, it's relatively safe, you're in the law enforcement center.
That's exactly why activist Bruce Wilson asked council to consider what this measure might do.
We saw a couple of weeks ago the homeless population getting beat up and jumped on in a camp. But here we are passing an ordinance.
Council passed the ordinance unanimously. Ballard says it fills a gap in the law, and he believes it's the best solution at the time.
Particularly when nothing exists now.
Wilson is now planning to help those who might feel put out by this passage.
What we're going to do after it's passed to make sure that the individuals, especially the homeless population, does not get trapped in this ordinance or the ordinance get used against them.
And also another activist who originally spoke out against the ordinance did come back to council today. He said he was now in favor after seeing the dirty conditions of the detention center lobby. Tonight was the second reading of the ordinance. Once it's brought up for the third and final reading, it'll be signed into law.
Another tool that cities have used to target people who live outside on the streets are laws that prohibit loitering. Due to the broad scope of prohibited behavior under loitering laws, cities have used these to target homeless people in public spaces. Fortunately, cities have found these laws less useful, as the Supreme Court has overturned several loitering laws for being unconstitutionally vague. In several cases, the Supreme Court has found vagrancy and loitering ordinances unconstitutional due to vagueness, in violation of the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. A statute is unconstitutionally vague if it does not give a person notice of prohibited conduct and encourages arbitrary police enforcement. Since many loitering laws have similarly broad and vague language, homeless people and advocates have a strong argument that such laws violate the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. And now let's look at sweeps after the following video.
Well, Chris, this is where many folks experiencing homelessness have called home for the past year during the pandemic. And because the city's housing programs are currently full, many of the folks forced to move out of here today told me they are just moving right across the street, or in some cases only a few blocks away.
Candace Montoya has been experiencing homelessness for 3 years now.
I mean, look at how many there are. I mean, it's ridiculous. So.
She and her husband spent Tuesday moving their pets and belongings from under I-80 to just a few blocks away.
It's funny, we're going right across, like, from the school.
Which
is what they said was the reason why they were doing this.
I feel bad for them. I think everybody needs a place to stay, but it's just getting too many that it's gotten out of control.
Neighbor Sandy Voschholtz is relieved to see something being done after homeowners and renters in the area have spent the past year complaining.
The thing is, they leave there and they just go down the street a little ways and then they're on the sidewalks.
This comes as Sacramento shelters, the Safe Ground camping area, and their hotel voucher program are at capacity.
What did you offer people? What did you try to do? How long did you work with anybody? And the answer out here is zero, none.
Caltrans says they made this a priority to happen one day before National Walk to School Day.
These sidewalks, you can't see them from here, but they're blocked right now with tents and encampments.
And because it is right under the highway, they say it's not safe for anyone to sleep there.
There's feces, needles, sometimes hazardous materials, be it stored fuels, canisters of propane, that sort of thing. Flammable materials.
City Council member Katie Valenzuela says this is not acceptable for Caltrans to move folks when the city doesn't have a place for them to go. But Caltrans says the ball is in the city's court to sign off on paperwork and do the environmental analysis in order to open up the approximately 20 other sites for housing around the city, part of the city's master plan to address homelessness.
We are a willing partner, and we want to speed that along. But right now, they have to do the application part.
The city says they are in the process of adding more sites, beds, and rooms, but confirmed there are currently no open beds available at this point in time. I did ask them about Caltrans cleaning up this site today, and a city spokesperson told me that when we do not have viable alternative spaces for people to go, moving them from where they are is not really a solution.
Cities also target people experiencing homelessness by conducting sweeps of areas where a person or several persons are living outside. Sometimes police or local government employees will go through an area where people are living and confiscate and destroy people's belongings in an attempt to clean up an area. While city workers may have the right to clean public areas, they must take certain measures to avoid violating people's right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment. Thankfully, this is not happening in Harrisonburg, Virginia, and I thank the city and the police department for not doing this. A seizure of property violates the Fourth Amendment when a governmental action unreasonably interferes with a person or his/her property. Courts have found that police practices of seizing and destroying personal property of homeless people violate these constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment. In addition, some courts have also affirmed homeless persons' right to be free from unreasonable searches, even if their belongings are stored in public spaces. And now, let's look at restrictions on feedings after the following video.
So if you're a strong believer that nothing comes for free, wow, do I have some proof for you. Police in Raleigh, North Carolina told a church group handing out free meals to the homeless in a city park that they needed a permit and had to stop immediately or go get that permit for $800 per day. Thank you very much. And if they kept handing out the sausage and biscuits and coffee, they would go to jail. How's that? So police have the law on their side. A city ordinance actually does prohibit anyone from handing out food in Raleigh in the city parks. Never mind, the group's been doing this for 6 years. The law is the law, right? How about morality? How about, is that law the right kind of law? I want to bring in Paul Callan and Tara Knight once again to talk law and morality. So let's talk law, Tara. Why all of a sudden after 6 years would they say the law is the law?
You know, I was thinking about this. I don't know the genesis of this action. It could be aesthetics. Did someone complain they don't like homeless people in the park? Could it be something like liability? They're worried if someone gets hurt, who's going to get sued? You know, the lawyers. I'm not.
Because then the city has to pay. If a homeless guy trips and breaks his ankle, he could sue.
Exactly. And if they continue to do that, usually ordinances only come with a fine. It usually doesn't involve jail, but the fine here, I understand, is $800 per day.
A permit is $800 a day.
Oh, is it? Okay, now, but how about the fine?
The fine, do we know? We don't know, but it was something that they'd be arrested for as opposed to being cited for, which I thought was really surprising. Okay. Paul, there is another side to this that some people may not see in this magnanimous effort to feed the homeless, which I think is laudable. What about the other side of the coin, that you need to protect homeless people from those who may have nefarious goals, poisoning it, driving them from the city because the food makes them sick, or even worse, maybe they're just careless and the food is left out overnight filled with E. coli and it's dangerous for the homeless. Could you not also employ that logic?
Well, sure, and that's why, you know, we regulate these things. You can't just have not-for-profit groups setting up randomly in parks. I'll give you another example. Let's say the park was next to a kindergarten, okay? Some parks are next to kindergartens. A not-for-profit or a church says, well, we're going to start feeding the homeless in that park where all these little kids play. People would be up in arms about that. So cities have regulatory schemes that there's a place where you can feed the homeless and there's a place where you have public parks. And I think all that's happening in North Carolina is they're enforcing the law. Now, maybe they didn't enforce it for a long time, but these laws exist for a good reason.
It's a silly thing to enforce.
What was I say? What about this community may just be gentrified? A lot of people might be moving in all of a sudden and then noticing that this is now happening.
It smacks of that. And churches do this all of the time. They're not regulated. And these people have been going on their way fine without any problems for so long. I don't understand why all of a sudden it's a big issue.
Police claimed, by the way, it was a liability issue, that the fear was when you get this permit, you're supposed to have an insurance company in case somebody trips and falls in the park and gets hurt.
As taxpayers, how'd you like to be on the hook for a couple $1 million in a I broke my hip case? But
and
listen,
they would be, yes.
And they would be. You're absolutely right. So we'll keep watching this and see what they come up with in this town. Tara Knight, great to see you. Thanks for coming on. Paul Callan, as always, love your insight.
Cities also have indirectly targeted homeless people by restricting service providers' feeding programs. I want to thank the city of Harrisonburg and the police department because this doesn't happen here, but sadly it happens in other cities throughout the nation. Historically, cities have attempted to restrict feedings on providers' property through zoning laws. More recently, some cities have passed laws to restrict feedings in public spaces, such as parks. For faith-based or religious groups conducting feedings as an expression of their religious beliefs, courts have found city restrictions on feedings an unconstitutional burden on religious expression. Litigation can protect the rights of homeless individuals and pave the way for better city approaches to homelessness. Homeless persons bringing a civil action can receive damages or obtain injunctive or declaratory relief. In addition, many cases settle and result in policies or protocols that ensure homeless persons' rights will be protected. The criminalization of homelessness is increasing as local governments find legal loopholes and replicate discriminatory policies, practices, and proposals from one place to the next. It doesn't have to be this way. We can shift resources away from harassing, citing, fining, jailing, segregating, and displacing unhoused people and use those dollars to invest in real solutions. In attempting to rid communities of homelessness, governments wrongly prioritize the desires of the housed over the needs of the unhoused. Being homeless is not a crime, and we must invest in real solutions that create safe, stable, affordable housing for the millions in the U.S. who need it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.